grammar. Now, the reason, by the way, that we're moving to a much more recent test is more so than the reading. Not that the reading hasn't shifted since practice test 1, but like, if I numbered this would be like practice test 25 or something like that. But the grammar definitely has in terms of what they test. For example, 5 out of 44 questions in the grammar on practice test 1 are what I call revision questions. Well, if you take a look at this test, 20% of this test, like 10 out of 40, 11, no, I think on this test it's, 10 out of 44 questions on this test are revision questions. It has literally doubled the amount of revision questions it asks. So, that goes from being like an important question on the old ones to a very important question on the new ones. So now we're going to start with those questions because they are not the most common. On this one, they're the second most common. It's 18% of the test. Normally, actually, it's 25%. This one had like a few fewer for whatever reason. But we'll start there. So these questions are questions that they're going to usually start with the words which choice. And they're going to give you a task. So for example, here on question 9, which choice provides the best transition to the paragraph that follows, right? So what is this question asking us to do? This question is asking us to set up the next paragraph. Now, it may or may not care what came before. Frankly, it usually doesn't. Like, it's just like, hey, let's get us to the things that we're actually going to be talking about next. So let's take a look. So, well, what is this next paragraph, like next few sentences about? The scientists also found a decline in nighttime pollination coincided with a decline in visits from daytime pollinators. The precise cause from this was unclear. One possibility is, so this is another thing the scientists found about a correlation between daytime and nighttime pollinators, right? We need to set this up. So if we take a look through these answer choices, which affected the overall, okay, so this is actually half of a sentence, so we definitely need the first part of it to figure out what we transition. From these results, researchers concluded that nocturnal pollinators were avoiding it. Okay, so we go from nocturnal were avoiding to daytime was also avoiding, and we don't know why, right? So, yeah, that next is not about how the overall yield was affected. Now, I'm sure the overall yield was affected, but that's not what this is about. You're gone. But these pollinators were regularly visiting the unbagged plants at the dark sites. No, the next paragraph, which is what we're setting up, talks about the daytime pollinators. Further research, absolutely not. And daytime pollinators are not making up for the loss. Yeah, that sets up that idea. Oh, okay, now we're also talking about these other pollinators. That's where we are. So let's find another revision question. Another revision question is question 18. Right. So which choice most effectively introduces the main idea of the paragraph? Now, this is asking you the main idea of the paragraph. It is not asking you, by the way, you guys do this all the time. This is the general you. I'm not specifically talking to my students who are watching right now. But, like I said, what you need to do with these questions is you read the question and then you answer the question they actually asked you, and not a question of your own invention. Now you might be thinking, but Jason, of course I should answer the question they asked me. Why would I do something else? I don't know, but you guys do it all the time. It's not what has the best information. It's not what has the most specific information. It's not what's the most relevant. It is whatever it actually asked you to do. And sometimes the thing it asks you to do will lead you to put in something sounding silly. When the SAT did a redesign like 6 years ago, wow, 6 years ago, I'm getting old. When the SAT did a redesign 6 years ago, they basically ripped off the grammar section from the ACT wholesale. So rather than give you an SAT example, which I don't want to ruin practice tests for you, I'll give you the ACT example because, by the way, the questions work exactly the same. They once asked, like, which one of these answer choices soften the language? And I, no joke, had to add the words brownish and fuzzy to the essay. Why would I add the words brownish and fuzzy to a formal essay? I don't know when I would ever want to actually do that, but the question asked me to, so that's the right answer, so I better add those. So what you need to do is you need to make sure you understand what is being asked. All right, back to this question. Which choice most effectively introduces the main idea of the paragraph? Okay, so we actually have to have read the paragraph to understand this. So what I would do is I would read, oh, by the way, I encourage what I call for this section the zigzag method. Basically, you read until you get to a question, you finish the sentence, then you go answer, then back to the passage, back and forth. You don't want to just go question to question and not read the passage. But like you're reading the passage quickly. Like you don't care too much what the passage is saying. But you are actually reading it and jumping back and forth. So here, what we need to do is when I get to this question, I would just read the paragraph and then answer the question. So, and I wouldn't like stop at 19 and 20. I would read it and then hop back. So let's read this together. All right, so this is talking about like, okay, when they asked people what they wanted relaxed dress codes, and like this worked out, people liked it. Like that's kind of the gist of what's going on here. That's what we're trying to set up. So let's take a look at these answer choices. This is not about a fun way to express individuality. This is saying it's like good for morale in the workplace. Relaxing dress codes can help broaden their customer base. It does not talk about customers. Foregoing formal work attire can also result in fewer conflicts between coworkers. No, and that answer is hilarious because I love the idea of two lawyers like making like snide comments about the other person's suits. That would just amuse me so much. And then D, instituting a flexible dress code can improve more employee morale. Yeah, that's what this paragraph was actually talking about. Oops, I did not mean to do that. Yeah, that is what this is actually talking about. So that is the answer. Now we're going to do one more of these, and then we're going to move on to a different question type. So the next one of these is question 26. Okay, so we're not going to do this one because this one would take forever. But do you see here it says, and this is why. This says which choice best sets up the main argument of the passage. Much like you have to read the whole paragraph to answer questions about a paragraph, you have to read the whole passage to answer questions about the passage. We are not going to sit here right now and read the whole passage, but what that means is you should skip this question and come back. Now, make sure you come back, like put a big like figure out how you're going to make yourself go back, but you're not going to you're not going to attempt to answer it now. So the next one after that is 31. All right. which choice provides the best information from the previous paragraph to the paragraph that follows? So here, the focus is actually on the previous paragraph. We need to make sure it refers back. So what was it talking about back here? While there's no evidence that commercial search engines intentionally skew their results in favors of these things, filtered based on the user's browsing history could produce similarly slanted results. Okay, so what we want to make sure we hit is like, you know, this could be bad. All right, this possibility is especially troubling. Okay, well, that like was troubling. That's definitely in the right ballpark. And this possibility would be a referential phrase looking back. While not like a bullseye, definitely is a strong candidate. This study therefore appears to contradict the idea that, okay, in order to evaluate this, because the study, we did just refer to a study. Yes, we did just refer to a study that most users display. Nope, what the idea we were just talking about in no way, shape, or form does that. Election outcomes are unaffected. What we were just talking about did not discuss election outcomes, and it is not an assumption of search engine designers. A is the best answer. Okay, now we're going to move to a different question type. We're going to move to, now on this particular test, this is actually the most common type of question, ranking in at 20.45% of the questions, and it is independent clauses. So it's very important you understand how to do these. So first up, what is an independent clause? Well, an independent clause is it's a mall Santa that doesn't need help from anyone. No, it's a statement that can stand on its own. An independent clause, you can view it as a statement that can stand on its own, a subject-predicate combination, or someone or something doing or being something. All of those are acceptable ways of saying it. Basically, you're going to read it and you're going to think, oh, that's a complete thought. Now, independent clauses do not need to be Shakespeare. I ran is an independent clause. He ran is an independent clause. Like, well, who is he? Well, it doesn't matter. Life is allowed to use pronouns. Those are independent clauses. However, contrast that with, like, imagine someone came up to you in the hall and went, since I ran, right? Like, well, what happens since you ran, right? That's not a full thought. Now, you are only allowed to have one of these in a sentence, unless you do one of four very specific things. The first thing is the semicolon. Now, there are a number of uses for the semicolon in English. However, the only one I've ever seen them test on the SAT is separating two independent clauses, right? Independent clause on the left, IC is my shorthand for independent clause. Independent clause on the left, semicolon, independent clause on the right. Now, what is the actual relationship? Sorry, I'm making sure this is not the bosses critiquing me. Definitely not. Okay, so what is, all right, so we have these two independent clauses. Right. So now what is the actual use of the semicolon? The actual use of the semicolon is to tell when the two clauses are like loosely related, but more related than a period. Yeah, okay. We'll get to a consequence of that later. Next up is the colon. Now, the number one most, a colon rather is an independent clause on the left and a dependent clause on the right. Now, here is the most important, independent clause on the left and either an independent clause or dependent clause on the right. So, here's the most important rule for the colon. you must have an independent clause to the left of that colon. Here is a list of things that are not independent clauses. I have many hobbies, including colon, right? Like, I have many hobbies, including colon, and then into the list doesn't work because I have many hobbies, including is not a full thought. Now, you could say, I have many hobbies, colon, launch into the list. That would be fine. Yeah. So now to the right, you can have literally whatever you want. A word, a list, another full independent clause. It's fine. Now, next up. Now, please do not think I'm about to tell you could join two independent clauses with a comma. That is a comma splice. You cannot do that. Like, you absolutely cannot do that. That is how they're trying to trick you most of the time. However, you can, in fact, join two independent clauses with a comma followed by a coordinating conjunction. So, now your list of your list of, what's the word I'm searching for? Your fully inclusive list of independent clauses is fanboys. Oh yeah, your complete list, I don't know how I missed the word complete, is fanboys. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so, right? That is the complete list. So you can join two independent clauses with a comma, a fanboy, and then you have a second one. Now, please note, actually, if you see comma and, if it's not the last item in a list of 3 or more things, that actually means it must be an independent clause. Like, you actually must be joining two independent clauses if you get a comma and it's not the last item in a list of 3 or more things. Same with comma but, right? You are allowed to use the word but without a comma. If you do comma but, there must be two independent clauses. Same with so. Not necessarily for, nor, or, yet, because those words can pull double duty with other things. But that is the third way. Now, the last way, the em dash. So now, an em dash is that long dash that you've probably never used in your life, but you've seen in SAT prep. So here, what you would do is you would start an independent clause, right? Well, so actually, let me rephrase. Normally, this is how you use the em dash. You start an independent clause, you have an interrupting clause, you finish the independent clause. It is the co-equivalent of commas or parentheses, right? Now, if you're using it this way, the way they're trying to trick you is they're trying to get you to start with an independent clause and start with an em dash and end with a comma, or start with a comma and end with an em dash. Can't do those. You have to either start with an em dash and end with an em dash, or start with a comma and end with a comma. Now, that is the most common way you'll see these. Like, if you see an em dash, go look around for another em dash. However, a infrequently tested way of doing this is you can actually do independent clause em dash followed by an independent or dependent clause just the same as you could do with the colon. Yeah, and those are the full list of ways you can join two independent clauses. By the way, the little trick I was alluding to with the colon, with the semicolon rather, is if you have two answer choices and one of them is a semicolon and the another one has a period, and that period is literally the only difference between the two answer choices, they both have to be wrong. The semicolon versus the period is the difference between loosely related and very loosely related. The SAT is not going to like sit there and be like, hey, how loosely related is it? Like, that's entirely subjective. They can't test that way. So if you ever see two identical answer choices where that's the only difference, you can actually eliminate both of them. Oh, by the way, another test taking trick. If you see the word being in an answer choice and it's not a revision question, that answer is wrong. Across every single test, if it is a revision question, no, sorry, not if it's a revision question. If it is a grammar question, right, not one of the please do this goal questions, and you see the word being in the answer, it has always been wrong 100% of the time. Yeah. All right, so now let's do some independent clause questions. So our first independent clause question is question 2. All right, so how do we tell we're dealing with an independent clause question? Because by the way, I don't think I said it before, but here is how you approach this test. Once you get to the question, you skim the answer choices, right? And then you go, from the difference in those answer choices, you go, aha, I know what they're asking me. And then you go evaluate it based on what you saw, right? So for example, here, we'll get into this question later, but just as an illustration, like I can immediately tell this is going to be a subject-verb agreement question. We have the singular form there, the plural form there, and 2 different verb tenses. Actually, by the way, the answer to this one is B, and you didn't need to do any work, and we will cover why later. But there's a real funny shortcut with those. But like you're able to identify it that way. But back to the, there's that's going to be like 2 questions a test, whereas this is, 10 questions a test. So the way you identify this question is you're going to look down and you're going to see just different punctuation marks. You're going to see a whole mix of them. So once you identify that, here's what you do. You read the sentence until you get to the punctuation mark and you ask yourself, is that an independent clause? And then you read to the right and you ask yourself, is that an independent clause? And then you punctuate appropriately. So let's check. Do we have an independent clause ending with the word pollinators? Daytime pollinators, such as birds and bees, have many well-documented threats. Yeah, that's an independent clause. Oh, then we have a comma fanboy. So we actually have to have an independent clause coming after that one. So Dr. Nope's team sought to investigate a potential threat to nocturnal pollinators. Yeah, that is a second independent clause. All right, so this one right here, independent clause. Now to the right, artificial light. That is most certainly not an independent clause, right? So now we need to figure out how to correctly punctuate it. Well, let's take a look. It's not going to be the semicolon. So yeah, it definitely, B seems like it would be correct. So now here's the relationship with the colon. I'm not 100% sure I said it before, but the way you would actually use the colon is what is on the right further explains what's on the left. That is the relationship. It is explanatory, which is often why you get lists like, oh, and here is a list of the thing I just said. I have many hobbies, colon, right? Well, okay, then if you list the hobbies, that is an explanation as to what the hobbies are. This one seems like it's going to be correct, but we want to check the others. C has no comma. That would create a fused sentence. This is like very clearly a different clause. Now, what's interesting is D. They do not do this very often. There is actually no grammatical problem with artificial lights. This is not based on grammar. However, the colon definitely expresses the relationship better. So the colon is what's correct. They do not do this trick very often, by the way. This may be the only time they've asked you to make that distinction. All right. Next up is number 4. All right. So we have a whole mess of things going on here. Let's untangle it. So, by the way I identified this is like we have so, we have comma, so comma while would subordinate the second clause. Like if I said I ran, independent clause. If I said while I ran, no longer an independent clause, because we added the word while, which has the effect of taking what would otherwise be an independent clause and making it a dependent clause. The comma while appearing and disappearing would be an indication that that is what's going on. But let's actually take a look at it. So before the plants were flowering, some of the plants were covered with mesh bags to outlaw, that is, okay, yeah, to prevent visits from pollinators. All right, well, that is most certainly an independent clause. Some of the plants were covered with mesh bags. Cool. Others were left unbagged. That is a second independent clause. We currently have two independent clauses, right? Well, we can't do that. Here, what they're trying to do is in answer choice A, while you can join two independent clauses with semicolon, however, you absolutely cannot do it with comma, however. Like that is not something you're allowed to do. And they will try and get you on it. You can do it with comma, but you can do it with semicolon, however, comma, but you can't do it with comma, however, comma. There you're just joining two independent clauses with comma. That's gone. Now B actually works, and B works for the reason why we talked about before. The entire way I identified this as an independent clause question. Well, the word while took what was an independent clause and made it a dependent clause. So B is going to be our answer, but let's just keep looking. Meanwhile has the same exact problem. Also, that's a terrible like relationship between them, but like that's a terrible transition for the two ideas, but also it doesn't fix that. And then here we have some of the plants were covered with mesh bags to outlaw visits from pollinators so that others were left unbagged. So this would actually fix our independent clause problem because it would do the word that would act as a subordinator, but like we're using the word so, that's cause and effect, and like that is most certainly not what the sentence was trying to say. So that's gone, and B is our answer. All right, we'll take a look at one more of these, and then we'll move on with our lives. Does anyone have any questions about anything we have covered thus far? All right. Next up is 13. All right, so I see a period, I see a comma, and I see a semicolon. Great, on pattern independent clause question. So here is what's going on here. Let's take a look rather. From retail services to large corporate offices, comma, employers are finding that flexible dress codes can make a company more attractive to potential workers. All right, this is an independent clause, right? Subject, verb, object. Well, sorry, subject, verb, object. Now, do we have an independent clause to the right? Boosting morale among current employees. Like, no, there's no verb there. That can't possibly be an independent clause. So we already know answer A is wrong, right? Now with B. Well, B gets rid of that. However, if you see a B, it says additionally, they can boost. Well, now we just made an independent clause for the second half of this. Like we went from not having one to like now we fixed the semicolon, but after we added a comma, we now made it a second independent clause. So that doesn't work. Period and boosting. So here's the deal. and boosting morale among current employees, still not an independent clause. And we put a period there, and like, you're not going to, on the SAT, start a sentence with the word and. Like, despite what people tell you, like, yes, you technically can do it, but like, don't. Don't. Just one of those things, like, even if you have a really good grasp of grammar, don't use grammar correctly when it's going to make everyone else think you're incorrect. Just a general life lesson. Now, answer, we know it's D because D is the only one left, but if we actually evaluate it, employers are finding that flexible dress codes can make a company more attractive to potential employers and boost morale among current employees. Okay, so there we have, yeah, and boost morale among current employees. We have now created a compound predicate where the dress codes can do this thing and do this other thing, and we're golden. Whew. Exhale. All right, next up, we're going to talk about subject-verb agreement questions. We're going to go back to this one. So, does anyone have any questions on anything we've just discussed before I start this? Okay, also, drop in the chat if there is any particular type of question you would like me to review, so I can tell you the whole strategy for that type of question, and we can go over one as an example, because we have about 20 minutes left. Okay. So, all right, so subject-verb agreement. Subject-verb agreement is roughly 5% of every test. 2 to 3 questions. That's what you're going to see of subject-verb agreement. Now, the fun part is subject-verb agreement, if you're able to identify it and remember the pattern, it is like trivially easy. So here's how subject-verb agreement works. So if you think you see a tense question, stop. It is probably not a tense question. They very seldomly ask tense questions. Like there are, like there can be one tense question a test, but like they're very rare. Subject-verb agreement questions are much, much more common. So if you think you see a tense question, stop and check if it's a subject-verb agreement question. Now, if you look at this, it's like, oh, are, have, illuminate, these are all different tenses. But if you see A and B, they are both present tense. And one is singular and one is plural. So now, like, so just broadly, what is subject-verb agreement? Subject-verb agreement is just the idea when you use a singular form of a verb. When you use a singular noun, you get one form of a verb. When you use plural nouns, when you have a plural noun, you get a different form of the verb. It is he sings with an S versus they sing without the S, right? Now, here's the list of like pairs you actually need to know. Is, are, he is, they are. Was, were. He was, they were. Has, have. He has, they have. And then, like I said, with sings and sing. So here's a neat trick for remembering this. All of the ones that go with singular verbs have an S. None of the ones that go with the plural verbs have an S. Oh, and one note, ED can go either way. ED works with both singular and plural verbs. So here, once I see we have a singular verb and a plural verb, both in present tense, I know that's what this question is. Now, here's a trick. This trick has, so, over the course of 25 tests, there's about 3 of these tests. There's 2 to 3. So we'll say there's at least 65 of these floating around out there, right? This trick has worked on all but 2 of them. So A is singular. It has the S. B is plural. It does not have the S. Ooh, hold on 1 second with this, actually. Oh, that's interesting. I just double checked my notes. This one's a little bit annoying. All right. So this is plural. This is plural, and this is plural. So like odds would strongly suggest that this is going to be singular, but like please check. Interestingly, a 2010 ecological study led by Dr. Eva Cope suggests that artificial lighting, the convenience that the modern convenience that illuminates many streets, storefronts, and athletic fields may be contributing. I believe I have identified a problem in my answer key because I'm pretty sure that works. Hold on 1 moment. Excellent. I have a problem in my answer key, not that this is one of the 2 exceptions. I need to fix that right away. So yeah, this is the singular one. These 3 are plural. It's the singular noun. So yeah, that trick works almost all of the time. Now, what is actually the subject? It is modern convenience, right? It is the modern convenience that does the illuminating. Cool. Another subject-verb agreement question here is question number 28. No, you know what? Actually, 15 minutes. We're just going to start blazing through different question types. Let's take a look at this type of question. So this type of question is actually, by this type of question, I'm going to question 12. Question 12 actually normally historically has been a huge part of the test. On this particular test, it only shows up once, but it is shortest is best. If you see a question that has 4 answer choices, all of which say like roughly the same thing, but one is noticeably shorter than the others, it's the shortest. This could be because of a wordiness issue. This could be because of a redundancy issue. But that's what's going on. So if we take a look here, this decision allowing employees to customize their previous uniform looks with accessories such as hats and socks reflects workplaces across the United States. Okay, so actually this isn't the shortest now that I'm looking at it, but it's, you get rid of those because of this redundancy. B and C are wrong because of this redundancy. What this one is actually doing that's a little even more atypical is this sentence just doesn't make sense with the word reflects. You do actually need a new trend. This one is both concise and specific enough. So the answer there is B. Now let's take a look at a singular versus plural versus possessive question, which is question 15. All right. So we have S apostrophe. If you see like S apostrophe S, S apostrophe, if you see like, apostrophes appearing and disappearing, you're in a singular versus plural versus possessive question. So this is asking you, do we have more than one thing? And does that thing possess something? Here's where you want to start. Now, what you just want to start with is, do we have one thing or more than one thing? It is so much easier to answer that than is something possessing the other thing, right? Now, sometimes that'll get you all the way to the answer. Sometimes it will not get you very far at all, but that's where you want to start. So let's take a look at 15. Individuals' motives may vary, but job recruiters are finding potential employers do blah, blah, blah. All right, so do we have one individual or more than one individual? We have more than one individual. So, S is plural. Apostrophe S is singular. And S apostrophe is plural possessive. So here, individuals apostrophe S, well, that would imply there's one individual. We are not talking about one individual. Now we actually do have to determine possession, right? Okay, so does anything here belong to the individuals? Like, yeah, the motives belong to the individuals. They are the motives. Like, that can be read as the motives of the individuals, right? The individuals possess them. So the answer there is just going to be A. But let's, for the sake of completion, check the others. Well, this one, like, no, that's not possessive. And the motives do not possess the may vary, which is the only thing in this sentence they would be allowed to possess. So that's dead to us. Great. Now let's take a look at combining sentences. My least favorite problem. So the first combining sentence question on this test was question 11. Nope, sorry, question, where is it? Question 6. All right, so which choice most effectively combines the sentences at the underlined portion? Unfortunately, I don't have like a concise strategy for this. Instead, I'm going to give you 7 guidelines on how to deal with this question. 1, it has literally never been semicolon. The correct answer to one of these questions has never involved a semicolon. If you see a semicolon, that answer is wrong. 2, be very, very careful of comma and. It had actually never been comma and from like 2015 to 2018. And then on one test, all of a sudden, comma and was the answer choice. And it's been the answer choice like once since then out of all these questions. However, it's a big red flag and it's probably wrong. Now, what did the 2 times it was correct have in common, and why the first time, before I was telling my students it was also never comma and, did they manage to get it correct anyway? 3, trust your gut. In those 2 circumstances, all of the other answers were awful. You should not read the answer and go, that's a terrible set of words. Why would anyone do that to a perfectly good paragraph, right? Trust your gut on that. The answer should not sound atrocious. 4, pay attention to your transitions. What do I mean by pay attention to your transitions? I have seen sentences joined with comma but where it's like those do not contrast in any way, shape, or form. 5, avoid redundancy. Now, redundancy is not necessarily wrong, but like if you use the word if you like say Ella Fitzgerald Ella Fitzgerald twice in 5 words, that's probably incorrect. 6, shortest is better. It is not best, it is better. Typically speaking, if 2 answer choices have the similar grammatical structure and one is just much shorter than the other, it's going to be the more straightforward one. Now, by the way, I don't think I've literally ever seen single word M- be incorrect. Like I just don't think I've ever seen that be correct. So, if you see this, like that's a good sign for it. 7, avoid passive voice. So here's the deal with passive voice. Passive voice is there's active voice and there is passive voice. Active voice is active voice is when the subject is doing the verb. The dog bit the boy. Passive voice is when the subject is receiving the verb. The boy was bitten by the dog, right? In that particular paragraph, the subject of the sentence, the boy, is receiving an action. Great. So actually, there's an eighth one because I broke up two of them. There is the misplaced modifier. Now, this is an entire question type in and of itself. I am not going to get into it right now because that is not an efficient use of the next 8 minutes. But there's a question type. It's called the misplaced modifier. Basically, it's when you have a descriptive phrase describing something it's not supposed to be describing, like featuring hyperlinks, comma, the users loved the program. Well, the users are not the thing that had hyperlinks. It would need to be featuring hyperlinks, comma, the program delighted the users. That is a real ACT example, by the way. All right. So let's actually do the combining sentence question. All right, so let's read our sentences. The bag plants couldn't be visited by pollinators because... Okay, so the bag plants couldn't be visited by pollinators, comma, so the lack of pollinators meant. That is redundant, right? Like we've just used the word pollinators twice. I'm not loving it. That's probably wrong. Being, nope, no, bad, we're done, but like, let's just keep reading. Being that they were unable to be visited by pollinators, the bagged plants, therefore, this also just sounds awful. The pollinators couldn't visit the bagged plants, and those plants self-fertilized. Okay, well, that actually is one of those wrong relationship, right? Like the relationship isn't like here's two entirely separate things. There definitely is a cause and effect relationship, so that's a bad transition. Because they couldn't be visited by pollinators, the bagged plants. Perfect. Moving right along. All right, addition, deletion. First one of these I see is question 17. Whew, excuse me. All right, at this point, so the strategy I'm about to give you works both for questions where it says the writer is considering adding and questions where it says the writer is considering deleting. Here's what you do. You read the sentence. So what you're going to do is you're going to decide if you add it or delete it before you even read this. You read the sentence before, the sentence it's in, if it's part of a sentence, and the sentence after. And then you ask yourself, is it relevant to any of these thoughts? And now, relevant is a pretty low bar. It's always going to be on the same subject. It's not going to be like prom is being held in June. I like apples. It's not going to be that irrelevant. But when it's irrelevant, it misses the point by a wide mark. Prom is being held in June. Juno is a Roman goddess. Like, yeah, okay. No. That has missed by a pretty wide margin. Right, so it's going to be something much more obvious. Now, what you actually will do with these, though, is, by the way, so fun fact, nothing has ever been removed or not added for any reason other than it's irrelevant, it's repeated, or it screws up a graph somehow. So you decide if it is relevant to the point of the sentence before, the sentence it's after, and the sentence it's in. If it's irrelevant, you knock it out, otherwise it stays in. Now, it hasn't been repeated since 2016. It is almost certainly not going to be gotten rid of because it's repeated, but I just want you to be aware that that's possible. And now, if it relates to a graph, you actually have to evaluate the answer choices one at a time. The graph ones are all over the place. For the graph ones, you have to like read each one and go like, well, is that true? well, is that true? You know, sometimes, like I've seen the graph says X, the graph does not say X. The graph says X, which proves Y. Well, it says X, but that's nothing to do with Y. The graph says X, which proves Y. Like, sure, but we don't care. You know, the graph ones are all over the place. But by the way, here's a fun trick. Oh, this one is actually about a table. So this would be a graph one. We're going to skip to the next one because the graph ones are the far less common ones. So we're actually going to jump to question 33. All right. The writer is considering deleting the underlined phrase, adjusting the punctuation as needed. Should it be kept or deleted? All right. So we read the sentence before the sentence it's in, and there is no sentence after. So in the case of political information, it is important for users to be aware of the existence of filters and the fact that be aware of the existence of filters and of the factors that might bias results. If search engines published this information, users would be better able to read political coverage online with an appropriately critical eye and thus base their political beliefs on a fuller range of information. So is this relevant? Yes, that is explaining how they would do it. That is not only relevant, that's incredibly relevant. So we can get rid of C and D, right? We are not deleting this. It is relevant. It is not repeated. Nothing to do with a graph. Now that we know it's relevant, we have to turn our brains back on. So why is that relevant? It is literally an example of what they're talking about. Yeah, it offers a potential solution. B is the answer. Now this says because it introduces an additional point about filter bubbles, like no, it most certainly does not. So that's how you do that question type. All right, so by the way, one thing to note here is, like, let's say answer choice D was no, because it contradicts the author. It contradicts what is said earlier, right? That will never be the answer. The only ways you will say irrelevant are irrelevant, loosely related, blurs the focus, tangentially related, one of those. If it says anything other than some synonym for loosely related, other than some synonym for irrelevant, it just can't be the answer.
Okay, so thanks for watching, and please remember to contact us at info@embracetutoring.com to set up any personalized private tutoring sessions you would like. Stay tuned for future videos, and best of luck with your studies. We definitely encourage you to visit our Instagram as well as TikTok pages if you have any questions along the way. Take care, guys. Best of luck with your studies.